Stephen Greenhut, Director of the Free Cities Center, a project of the Pacific Research Institute, and we look at all of the big, interesting urban issues that are popping up in California and the West Coast. I'm here with Nick McConnell. He's a reporter with the Vacaville Reporter, and he's been covering really one of the biggest stories in Solano County and probably in decades. There's a proposal by Bay Area investors called California Forever to build a whole new city not that far from here. We're in the city of Rio Vista. It's a small delta city right on the Sacramento River, and this has been kind of one of the key places where there's been community concern and discussion about the new project. So I'm here with Nick, and Nick, explain what you've been doing and some of the reporting you've been doing.
Absolutely. So we sort of picked up the story after the group of investors was made public by the New York Times. They dropped a story, I want to say it was in very late August, and we picked up in early September, sort of asking from a community angle of our community officials, what do you think of this? And at the time, there was so little known that people really didn't have too many reactions to share. But there was a lot of initial frustration surrounding the secrecy behind this project. California Forever have now come out and said that they've been buying land for 5 years or more before they became public. And I think folks were frustrated that they hadn't come out in front and said, this is exactly what we're doing. So we followed that initial kind of public confusion, and then California Forever started to host their town halls and have communications within the community. And then we started covering them just like any other community stakeholder, right? We try to cover all of our nonprofits and all of our businesses and things like that. And so in all of their interactions with cities, we covered their interaction with the Solano County Water Association, where they discussed possibly paying for a study for a new pipeline to be built from Lake Berryessa. And since then, it's just sort of been every time that there's something that we think might affect our readers that has something to do with this project, we try to keep people updated. So in January, they had their town halls last year, and then in January, they had their, their initiative was released. And then since then, they've refiled their initiative a couple times. So we've just tried to cover those events, kind of keep people up to date with what's going on.
Yeah, so give a summary of the project. It's going to be a whole new city just a few miles from here. And so maybe just some of the general parameters of what they're doing.
Sure, absolutely. So to the best of my knowledge, there is zoning for neighborhood mixed use and commercial and manufacturing and a downtown area. The idea is sort of to build a new city. Now, it won't be a city until it incorporates down the line, but it certainly functions as an independent community from any of the other communities in the county. That city will have the option to incorporate. The voters will be able to decide, but it will remain in unincorporated Solano County until they do so. The scale of the city, and I know we've given you some maps, but it will come basically from sort of the edges of Travis Air Force Base all the way to Rio Vista, and from Highway 12 up to about the north boundary of the Air Force Base on the other side. But it has sort of a slightly smaller but similar footprint to similar cities in the county like Vacaville and Fairfield.
And how many homes are they talking about?
So that's complicated. It sounds like the first 50,000 homes are what they've planned for so far, but within the initiative it can be, or 50,000 people, residents, in the initiative they can build all the way up to 400,000.
Oh, okay. And then, so in this area here, Rio Vista, this is the Delta, which is the an area of maybe 1,000 miles or more of waterways, and it's where it's kind of the heart and soul of California's water issues. And this is a very small town here. And when you get over to Vacaville and Fairfield, you're really getting into fairly large suburbs in the outer Bay Area, right? So it's probably a lot of difference in how people perceive these things. So around here, what's the sense here in the smaller town area of the Delta?
Here in Rio Vista, I think it's been a little bit more personal and a little bit more ardent concern because it is so close. One of the things that I know was important to Rio Vista was, or that California Forever says was important to Rio Vista, was leaving a green belt in between the two communities so that Rio Vista can maintain their sort of independent feel and independent nature from a larger community coming in. just west of here. In Rio Vista, I think there's a lot more connection with farmers who sold land to this particular company, and there's a lot more connection with agriculture as an economic engine as well. And so there's been a lot more concern about what does this mean for Solano County farms and open space. Not to say that there haven't been those concerns across the county, but I would say specifically here in Rio Vista, that's been one of the more important refrains.
Flannery and Associates, that's the overarching company. They purchased the property, and now they're suing some of the farmers over. Well, maybe you can explain that.
With specific regard to the group of farmers that they have been in legal action with, it is, I want to say that it was 6 families that they got down to that they ended up suing. And what they have alleged is that they were attempting to price fix and communicate with one another about what they were going to set their prices at, which they've alleged that's illegal. Now, a lot of those lawsuits have settled. I believe at this point in time there's only one still pending, although that conversation might be better to have with California Forever. But I think people took very personally, we spoke about those town halls. In the Rio Vista town hall, there was someone who got up and said, neighbors don't sue neighbors out here. This is not something that we do. This is not how we deal. And I think the fact that legal action has been looming over farmers has been a real concern for people here because, again, that's the economic lifeblood of this community.
Yeah, you were mentioning that people here do seem to understand that, have concerns about the housing shortages and the high prices of housing in the area. Mm-hmm. And so that this project seems to be addressing that issue.
Well, in my estimation, housing here is like housing anywhere. It depends on who you ask as to what their opinion of what the housing market looks like and what the housing market should look like out here. But I would say that part of California Forever's really explicit push has been for young people who have been in recent years priced out of this area. And it's also been a pitch to the people who love those young people, to families, to aunts and uncles and parents and grandparents. Don't you want to keep your family members close once they graduate high school and they go off to college and they look and they say, I'd love to come back home, but there's nowhere affordable in the area. California Forever's sort of one of the central thrusts of their pitch has been, this will be a place your kids can live that is only 15 minutes down the road from you.
Do they have a pitch about job creation also, or is it mostly, it looked like a kind of a new urbanist project where they'd have a downtown and walkable communities and, I don't know, wind farms and all the stuff that everybody kind of wants now. So how are they dealing with the job issue? What are they talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So California Forever in their initiative has released a list of 10 voter guarantees. And one of those voter guarantees is the jobs guarantee. That jobs guarantee guarantees that after the city gets to 50,000 people, it cannot build any more. It cannot grow past 50,000 people without creating 15,000 new jobs that I believe are 1.5 times the average median salary in this area. So there is a hard and fast guarantee that will be, if I recall correctly, vetted by an outside investigator that will come in at that point in time and say, yes, they have, met the requirements of this, and then they can build, I believe it's another 50,000 homes. Everything is sort of built in those chunks, or not homes, I'm sorry, another 50,000 residents. So there is a jobs guarantee, and they've had conversations about, well, maybe we could move company headquarters here. There have certainly been interest from some of their investors to sort of stay in the Bay Area, but build new campuses and things like that. So I think that the sort of implicit argument is if you build it, they will come.
Seems like they're not building it as a traditional ex-urban neighborhood, but they're trying, because the commuting time to the Bay Area from Solano County, from that spot, it's still going to be somewhat of a haul, right? So they're trying to create an all-encompassing city where people might actually live and work and not just commute.
Live and work and recreate and go to schools and be a cultural hub and have restaurants and things like that. The idea is to build out sort of an entirely modern city out here in eastern Solano County. One of the things that they've hit really hard throughout this listening tour and throughout their campaign has been commute times. Commute times from Solano County are some of the highest in the Bay Area because lots of people do go into sort of the inner Bay, but it's so far out here in the eastern part of the Bay Area that I think that has been a compelling argument for them as well. Don't you wish that your work was 15 minutes away instead of 2 hours and 15 minutes away? And they talk a lot about it in the terms of time spent with kids. When you're not at home, when you're commuting, you're not spending time with your kids, you're not building community, you're not out in your community. And so shortening commute times has been a central part of their pitch as well.
Have you talked to many of the politicians? I mean, I'm sure I've seen some of the members of Congress who haven't been very favorable, but I haven't seen what the board supervisors have said, or maybe some of the state legislators. What's your sense of the politician view of it?
Certainly. So I think this is another interesting thing. Wherever you sit really does kind of indicate however you feel. Certainly both congressmen who are active in the area, John Garamendi and Mike Thompson, they had a press conference actually just last week about concerns, particularly about Travis Air Force Base, but across the board. They're concerned about traffic, they're concerned about urban sprawl, they're concerned about a number of issues. Fairfield Mayor Kat Moy has historically been sort of a big opponent of this. She was looking around to find more information about this before even the New York Times story came out, and has been adamantly against it since day one, and really frustrated with the way that the company has dealt with surrounding communities. And yet I think you mentioned the Board of Supervisors, Mish Mashburn has come out and said what he can say, even though he needs to, vote on this down the line on the Board of Supervisors if passed. He's come out and spoken at Solano Together. That's a coalition of folks against it. He's spoken at their events and said, I don't know what we can trust here. I don't know what's happening. And I'm frustrated with the lack of transparency and communication. I think that's been the biggest refrain from elected officials is, why was no one consulted on this? Why did no one hear about this until, you kind of got thrust out into the public here? And why did it take so long to sit down and come to the table about this?
Now, if the voters it's a countywide vote, right? If they reject it, is there a plan B, or?
There is a plan B. What exactly that plan B looks like has been a little bit vague. What they've said is they might use some of their land, which is currently under the city limits of Rio Vista, and build a development within Rio Vista. But then I believe that would have to come in front of the Rio Vista City Council, right? What Jan Schramek, the CEO of California Forever, has said very unequivocally is, I will make this happen no matter what. And they talk a lot about having the time and the patience and the funding to get what they want to do done, right? So I would not be surprised if if this doesn't pass, if it's the last ballot initiative. I would be a little surprised if it's the last attempt that they use. I believe that there is a plan B, and we've seen pieces of it, but we haven't seen the whole thing yet.
Now, you mentioned that they adjusted the boundaries because of concerns about the Air Force Base. What happened there?
Certainly. So the original boundaries came up closer on that, that would be the northwest side, closer to Travis Air Force Base. And Travis was one of the main concerns of a lot of local electeds because Travis is a major economic driver for the county. And in Solano County history, having bases encroached upon and losing bases looms really large because the naval base at Mare Island was lost years ago, and that really hurt the city of Vallejo. And so there's a lot of concern within Vacaville, and I think especially in Fairfield, that if we lose this base, if we lose this massive economic engine, what happens to our local economies? What happens to all of our service providers? What happens to our school districts and things like that? What if all of that goes up in smoke because it can no longer operate due to encroachment? What does that mean? So California Forever recognized this, and it sounds like what happened is they went to the base and basically said, how can we make this project more compatible with Travis? And what Travis said is, we fly training missions over that northwest quadrant of where you're looking to build, and having any infrastructure there that isn't compatible with the base would make it difficult for us to continue our mission. So what California Forever did is they refiled their ballot initiative last week, and that ballot initiative said, basically, we are going to take the portion that they spoke about and we're only going to build Travis compatible infrastructure, which is any infrastructure that Travis is willing to sign off on. From there, Travis Air Force Base came out with a statement a couple days later and said, great, we look forward to the potential benefits of this new community on our base in terms of, off-base housing for service members and their families has been mentioned, and access to amenities for service members and their families has been mentioned as a potential positive. But what the base has said is, given this new adaptation to the plan, we're going to be able to continue our whole mission.
Yeah. So Nick, you've been to these probably more than you want to remember, but to all these different public hearings, and give me a sense of how have they been widely attended? Are they emotional? What do you find?
They have been broadly, widely attended, particularly Once California Forever, and I think the broader sort of information apparatus in the county did a good job of getting the information out as to when these were happening and what they would be about. They were emotional, and I think the word that we pulled away from a lot of them was combative, particularly the ones in Vallejo and Vacaville were folks are frustrated, and they wanted to let people hear it, and they wanted to let people know. I think there was a large contingent who were, hey, we're here to tell you we're not interested in this, no matter what it looks like, no matter what changes. We are displeased with the fact that you want to build this here, and we're not interested. And then there were folks who would come in and they would say, okay, I have this one really big concern. Can we fix this? I'm particularly concerned about the Air Force Base. I'm particularly concerned about Jepson Prairie. I'm particularly concerned about sort of these one-issue things within it that they said, if this doesn't budge, I can't even think about it. And then there were a handful of people across all of those town halls who would stand up and say, you know what, there's a lot to like here. And almost without fail, folks would respond to that and say, that's not the majority of us. The majority of us who are here at these town halls are frustrated. I want to be cautious about reading too far into what those town halls meant about the overall climate, because I think it's worth thinking about who decides to come out to a town hall. Folks are motivated by frustration. Folks are motivated by opposition. And someone who might say, oh, I might vote for that if I learn more, but I'm not going to go to this thing because I know a lot of people are angry. They might not turn out to something like that. But certainly at the town halls, the vast majority of people were frustrated, they were distrustful, and they were by and large against the project.
What's the next decision point, just so viewers could know that?
Sure. So I'll try and walk a couple steps down the road here. So next, they need to get signatures for their ballot initiative. It seems that possibly, because they've refiled a few times over the last couple of months, this might be the final version of the ballot initiative, or they may decide to refile yet again. But they need to obtain a certain number of signatures. It's a threshold. I know it's a percentage of the county, but it's relatively low to get it on the ballot. And they're very confident that they'll be able to collect their signatures with time to spare. After that, we'll be in full-blown campaign season. They have said that they will spend what they need to spend, or what they think they need to spend to get this passed, but they haven't given sort of an upper limit on what they're willing to spend or what they're able to spend in terms of a campaign. And there are now sort of concerted opposition groups. The biggest one is Solano Together, which is a coalition of groups like the Sierra Club and some local electeds and folks like that who have come, the Farm Bureau as well, who have come together and said, we don't want this in any way, shape, or form. Solano County wants to be able to pattern its own future for itself. And they have come out, they had a debate at the Solano Economic Forum a couple of weeks ago. And certainly I think we're going to see, a ballot initiative campaign now. It's sort of, there's a formula for how these things work, and that's how it's going to play out. And then obviously in November, we'll have an election about it.
Yeah, so it's on the general election.
Yes, on the general election ballot.
And then finally, tell viewers where they can read your articles.
Yeah, absolutely. So please subscribe to the Vacaville Reporter. We have both print and online editions. And that's just our website. So,
Vacaville Reporter.
VacavilleReporter.com. Yes.
Okay. Today I'm with one of our writers, Edward Ring, who's written to some degree about this new proposal. We've talked earlier with Nick McConnell, who's a reporter with the Vacaville Reporter, and he gave us some of the details of the project. Ed is a big brain guy who's been thinking about what possibilities are available in creating a city from scratch. And that's what we want to talk with Ed about, is what could they do there? How could this move the needle? How can this deal with our housing, the state's housing crisis? And what ideas can we get? What suggestions can we make?
You're looking at what power, water, transportation, waste management, food, right? You got to get all that stuff in and out of cities. So there are conventional ways to do that that would be the most cost effective. And that would be how you could build a city that people could afford to live in. But you got to ask the question, well, is that really going to work in the whole world? Is that really something that would be working 300 or 400 years from now? Or do you have to look forward? You want to be on the cutting edge, but not the bleeding edge. And if you look at it that way, maybe they should try to figure out how to build, for example, net zero structures that are actually generating not only their own power, but surplus power. They're very interesting. So why not, just cover the roofs, north and south face, just make every roof 100% photovoltaic, have these big batteries and actually export power and have a energy positive city, for example. And that's just the energy side of it. What about the water? Why not have there's a lot of brackish water in the San Pablo Bay and the estuaries of the San Francisco Bay. Why not desalinate all that water? When you have surplus electricity, turn on the desalination plant. Have a offstream reservoir in some of the hills around the site of the development and store the fresh water in that reservoir. So there are things like that which, if you could do them at an ambitious scale, and if you could do them embracing enough of the emerging technologies to bring the costs down, you really would be setting an example. So there's an opportunity for these folks because they're all billionaires and they really believe that they are on the cutting edge. I mean, we know that about the investors in this. They have a lot of money and very ambitious, and they're very motivated. They want to do something that's going to set an example for the whole world. So they should be thinking about creating a city that, imagine that it's on Mars or it's on the moon, a city that's completely capable of supporting itself with all of the resources that a city needs: food, water, transportation, waste management. They could, for example, maybe have some industrial parks where they're growing food indoors. They could have even be net positive in terms of their food supply.
What would you do in terms of building? We got the infrastructure. Would you try to build a downtown? Would you build single family houses? Yeah. Would you build a mix? What are you thinking?
Well, you definitely want a mix, but I think where you have to start, you really have to start from a perspective of let's build something that's just beautiful. You have to, and there's an awareness of that, but there's too many cliche designs. There's too much groupthink, but if they could, return to some of the classic values that we've got. I mean, yes, you've got to have single family homes because people love to live in single family homes. With yards. And they could take the 80 square miles they're working with and they could put, onto half of it or a quarter of it, these so-called sprawling suburbs, and they'd have a city of 100,000 people. One of the problems with housing in California is the impact fees and the cost of the land. Make a house, your typical house, you've already out $400,000 before you've put a stick in the ground. So they've got to manage both of those things. Maybe they've got the land piece of it covered if they can get the land entitled, because the reason land's so expensive is because there's only a small fraction of land in California that's where you're permitted. Yeah. So if they can cross that threshold, because they bought the land quietly and they bought it as agricultural land, so if they can succeed in getting the land rezoned, maybe their lot size in terms of the cost that built into each home or into each unit, maybe they can minimize that, and it won't be $200,000 or $300,000. It'll be more like $50,000. Right. Impact fees are designed to pay for everything, right down to public artwork. Right. So if they can pay their own infrastructure costs and negotiate some sort of exemption from the impact fees, maybe they can get the costs down to where, before they start building the house, each single family house only has 100 or 150,000 built into it. Now the challenge is, well, how do you build the house for less money?
This isn't going to be a totally privatized city, or probably not. They haven't discussed the governance yet. But there are some areas that they could push in that direction, right? What would you suggest?
But it comes back to, how do you sell these things? I mean, how do you make it a win-win? labor isn't the biggest constraint. It's headcount and it's inefficiency. So if you can convince labor, well, this is an incremental bump to your employment. You're going to have members that are going to be involved in the construction. They're going to be involved in administering the city, but it's not going to be as many as it was, in the old cities with the old methods. But it's still a plus for you, so can you compromise? And they have to say to the environmentalists something similar. They have to say, look, we have to have housing, but we're figuring out how to do this with a footprint that's very enlightened. This is not, yes, it's a suburb, but these are net zero homes, and we're going to manage our own waste. We're going to have our own waste management. We're going to produce extra energy. We're going to produce extra water. We're going to recycle 100% of our wastewater. And those are the kinds of things that ought to prevail. And if they can communicate those things to the community adequately, and say, and by the way, we're also going to create more jobs than we're going to consume. The people coming in are not, and living here aren't going to be able to fill all of the jobs we're going to create. We're going to have indoor agriculture. We're going to have a waste management processing plant where we're going to be able to process more than our own, and we can help offset some of yours, and we can offer you competitive services to help. That kind of direction, I think, can be. I think it would help them. I think it would help them make their case, because as it is, I think they're really fighting long odds. It's going to be very hard to build a new city anywhere in California, even with these billionaires that have all these resources to bring to it.